Hi, and welcome to the last week of our summer Slow Down series. This class is a Yin Yoga session for the legs. So I suggest having a couple of blocks on hand or a bolster. A blanket may be quite handy as well to fold that up and put that underneath you at times. So get whatever supplies you need ready and go ahead and join me on the mat. We will go ahead and get started in a reclined position. Slowly lower yourself onto your back. And instead of coming into a full Shavasana, we'll just keep the feet connected to the mat. Allow the knees to drop inward. And then from here, take the left hand to the heart and then the right hand across the belly. We'll just get started taking a couple of minutes to ground ourselves. And maybe for the first time today, you're feeling that connection with the earth. Allowing the knees to drop inward gives our low back extra support as it makes that connection with the mat. And you can also feel fully supported as we start to draw our attention inward and start to focus on the breath. Notice the gentle rise and the fall of the belly as your right hand lifts and lowers in gentle waves. We can also use these first couple of minutes to maybe take a moment to understand what truly brought us to our mat today. Perhaps you're looking for physical well-being. Maybe you just need some peace in your life. Or you're looking to bring balance into some areas in your life or into your physical body. Whatever brought you here, use that knowledge to set an intention for your class today. Your intention should be a positive statement so you can instill that positivity throughout the class and use it at times where you may feel that you need a little more focus. By bringing your intention to use, you can draw more attention to certain areas of the body. So whatever phrase you would like to use, whether it is I am peace, I am joy, I am healthy and grateful to be alive, choose your intention here. If you've chosen your intention, go ahead and softly separate the knees. And we're going to roll onto our side and come up into a seated position for our very first pose of the day. We'll start with a seated butterfly or Badakanasana. So join me in the center of your mat and then bring the soles of the feet together. Now take great care with the knees here. If you are finding that your knees are bothering you, you may want to have the feet further away from you on the mat, but play around with the angle and see what suits you best, because again, this is a leg-centered class. So if you're trying to have more of that attention into the legs, into the inner groin, you may want to start to draw them a little bit closer. You can also support the knees because they most likely will be lifted somewhat in this pose. So if you would like cushions or blocks underneath the knees, that will be very supported. Wherever you're at, start to sit up tall and then bend forward from the hips. Once you reach a point to where you can no longer maintain that straightness in the back, just allow yourself to fold over. Allow the spine to round. And maybe fold and drop the head down. Hands can be tucked under the feet like mine. Or if you prefer, you can also extend the hands out in front of you. If they are underneath the feet, just make sure that you're not pulling or trying to force anything to happen. We're just staying in the pose for about 2 to 4 minutes to give the body some time to relax and to deepen further into the pose. Return to the breath. On every inhale, feel it expand all the way down through the length of the spine, into the tailbone, and running out through the hips, into the inner thighs. As you exhale, use that space you've created, and maybe find yourself relaxing and deepening further into the posture. With these long holds in our yin sequence, we have a lot of time to check in with the body. Notice where you may be holding on. Perhaps there's tightness in the shoulders, maybe the neck or the head. Use this time to search for that depth, search for that edge. Find that point where you feel the stretch in the inner thigh, you feel the lengthening of the spine, you feel the hips start to open, and allow the body to melt into that sensation. Once you're deep into that sensation, create a relationship with stillness. Allow yourself to hold the posture for several breaths. And maybe become surprised as you notice the body sink further and further towards the earth. Now, since we do hold these poses for several minutes, much longer holds than we would in a vinyasa class, we need to take extra care when coming out. So use the hands to help push the torso upright and very slowly come out. As we are loosening up things, and so you are probably much more loose than you were when you started the pose. So just staying upright here in your butterfly, let's take a gentle twist over towards the right. To counter that forward fold, we'll just take a nice little twist. And then let's turn over towards our left, taking the right hand towards the left knee, using that little bit of leverage to look over the left shoulder. And then back to center. From here, you can use your hands to assist the legs to bringing them up. Maybe extend them out in front of you, and if you want, you can just give them a little tap along the earth. We're going to come into our next pose, which is definitely not a simple pose. We're going to come into straddle, a wide-legged straddle. So it can be helpful to come sit onto a folded blanket to bring the hips a bit higher. This gives the hips and the pelvis a little bit more room to tilt forward. So have that handy if you would like to use it. Also, open up the legs only as wide as you feel comfortable. It doesn't need to be super wide. And if you feel like the hamstrings are being little extra this morning, you can also bend the knees. Keep the knees bent, place some blocks or maybe a couple of pillows underneath them, and then bend forward from the hips. You can always start here, and as we hold for a minute or two, you may find that you want to take the blocks away and deepen a little bit further. If you want a bolster in front of you to lean forward onto, that's also a wonderful option. Staying fully supported in your yin poses allows the body to open. It gives the nervous system permission to relax and tell your body that it's safe and to relax deeper into the pose. I'm going to start here today. I particularly enjoy the sensation that this is giving into my hips without causing extra strain onto my hamstrings. Straddle is a very deep pose, and if you're doing this during a vinyasa class, hopefully you have warmed up quite a bit. But in our yin class, there is no warm up. We do this class cold generally, so without any warm up. So just notice that there will be a lot of tension into the back of the legs, into the hips, maybe all the way down into the calves. But that tension, the coolness of the muscles is actually allowing us to get further into the fascia and to the deeper ligaments and joints. So that does assist us in doing these long holds, so that when we exercise these holds, we aren't going too deeply into them. Generally, if you're very warm and doing some of these poses for 5 minutes, you might find that you got a little too deep into the pose. But again, that's why we always come out of them with care and also with our counter poses. On an inhale, walk the hands back. Start to lift the torso to an upright position. If we're using blocks, as I did, slowly remove those blocks. Maybe take the fingertips behind you and draw the feet in, and we'll take just a couple of windshield wipers to allow things to move freely through the hips and into the legs. And when you are ready, we're going to come into a caterpillar pose. So facing the front edge of the mat. Again, you may want to sit up onto a folded blanket to have the hips a little bit higher and to also give them a little more freedom to allow that tilting forward of the pelvis. Grab your blocks, grab your props. I'm going to grab a bolster because as I come into my forward fold in my caterpillar, I'm going to use the bolster as a support to just gently drape my torso over and fold over into my caterpillar pose. So whenever you are ready, go ahead and lift the torso up nice and tall. Maybe draw the arms up to the sky. We'll start to bend forward from the hips and then allow the back to round over. You can come right over that bolster or over your legs if you feel comfortable with that this morning. Feel free to make any adjustments. It's that attention to detail, noticing where we are feeling every pose in our Yin Yoga. So if you are feeling this more by draping over a bolster, then that, and you can feel that you can relax into the pose here. That's a wonderful shape for you. Otherwise, if you need to sit up nice and straight and keep the back nice and tall to protect the low back, you can also just bring the fingertips behind you and just bend from the hips and keep the back nice and straight. Even with this, I'm still feeling a very good deal of stretch in the back of my legs along the calves and the hamstrings. If you find your mind starting to wander, bring your awareness back by using that intention that you set at the beginning of practice. I am joy. I am peace. I am love. And since this is a very deep forward bend, again, we'll use the strength in the hands and the upper body to push ourselves back up to an upright position. If you are using a bolster, Move that off of the legs. And then from here, take the hands behind you and just give the legs a little tap out along to the mat. We'll again counter our deep forward bend with just a little twist. So let's take the left hand to the outside of the right thigh, twisting over towards the right. Inhale back to center, and we'll exhale, twist it over towards the left. And then we'll return back to center. From here, let's cross the legs. We're going to come forward and into a tabletop position. I'm going to adjust some of my props so that they aren't in the way for now. From our tabletop, we're just going to push back into a downward facing dog. Not for the full effect of a downward dog as we would in a vinyasa flow, but we are going to use it here just to walk out the feet a little bit, feel a stretch into the back of the legs, into the ankles, and just to move into our legs a little bit. You can shift the hips over to the right, maybe shift them over to the left. Go ahead and take some liberties in your downward facing dog. Maybe you feel like you just want stillness this morning. Your heels do not need to touch the mat, but we're just going for that intention of wanting the heels to move closer and closer towards the mat. And from our downward facing dog, we're going to step our right foot forward and bring it into our Swan Pose, also called half pigeon in your vinyasa flow. Now in Swan Pose, you may feel that you are lifted in the hips. We'll need to make some adjustment, either by having a block underneath the right hip to feel stable, or a bolster, pillow, or folded up blanket, depending on your range in your hips. Also, play with the angle of that front right knee. If you draw it in closer, you draw the right foot in closer to the body, it's going to be a little bit easier for you to do this, especially since we are doing this cold. We're not really warmed up. Our hips and our legs are, this could be the first thing that we're doing in the morning. So if you have that foot in a little bit tighter, by all means, go ahead and keep it that way. To get started, we're going to stay upright in our Swan Pose. So our torso is directly over the hips. So we have our center of mass right over the hips, over that joint, and we're placing the most pressure on the hips at this point. We'll stay here for about 2 minutes before we come into our sleeping swan. The back leg should be nice and straight with the kneecap facing down. Make sure that it's not rolling off to the side. Send that breath down into the left hip. Feel yourself balanced between the right and the left side so that we're not rolling and tipping over towards the right. If you feel like you are having a little bit of that tippiness, you may need a little bit more of a cushion under the right hip, like a folded blanket or a pillow. From here, we're going to put our swan to sleep. So you can walk your arms out in front of you and either fully extend the arms out and drape the torso across that right shin, allowing the forehead to come to the mat. Or if you want to use your bolster today, you can take the torso and just drape it directly over the bolster, maybe bringing the side of the cheek to rest. Props are never a crutch in yoga, whether it's Yin Yoga or Vinyasa flow. You will generally find new sensations, and you might find that you increase the edge or find that you really like where you're going with the prop by using that prop. You might find that you feel yourself getting a little deeper into some spots that maybe you didn't pay attention to before. Slowly start to draw the arms in. Again, using that strength of the upper body to lift yourself to upright. If you had a bolster or a prop out in front of you, you'll need to move that slightly out of the way. And from here, we're going to roll onto the right hip and draw the left leg around. Cross the left knee on top of the right for our shoelace pose on this side. Now, if this is not accessible to you and it's just very difficult to cross the knees on top of each other, you may want to come into a seated figure four pose. So then you would just take the sole of the right foot to the mat and cross the left ankle on top of the right. Adjust how you are seated by drawing that right foot in closer or further away, and that will change the sensation into the outside of the left hip. So that's an option. You can also take another reclined butterfly if you would like to join us in that position. Wherever you're at, if you're in shoelace, you should have the left knee stacked just about on top of the right knee, and then check in with the sit bones. So those two bony protrusions at the base of your sacrum, and just make sure that you are balanced evenly onto the sit bones and not tilting from one side or the other. In your shoelace pose, we're just going to stay here in this position. Take an inhale. And then exhale. Start to walk it forward. Come to a point where you start to feel a nice deep stretch into the outside of those hips. It's a very intense external rotation of the hips. And naturally, the position of the ankles are getting a bit of a stretch in this position as well. As you feel yourself start to relax and deepen even further, maybe you can bring the arms all the way to the ground. If you would like support for the head or the forehead, a block is nice so that you can have some of that weight supported. And then check back in with the hips. Feel them connected and pushing down into the mat. That downward sensation will help you feel it even more. Use the breath again, nice deep breaths in through the nose, traveling all the way through the body, and exhale it out, release.
Notice how you can feel that breath fill almost every fiber, every cell as it travels down through the length of your body. You can almost feel all the way to your toes on every inhale. We'll start to come out with an inhale, pausing at the top of the pose, leaning back slightly with the hands so that you can draw the legs out in front of you. And then again, we'll just take a couple of windshield wipers. When you are satisfied with that, go ahead and cross the ankles and then bring yourself into a tabletop once more. From tabletop, we'll push back into our downward facing dog and start that whole process onto the opposite side. Feel free to walk your dog, taking a moment to breathe and also to feel that movement in the hips, shift left, shift right. And from here, we'll bring the left foot forward, taking the left ankle behind the right wrist, bending at that left knee, adjusting so you can find what suits you, walking the right leg out behind you so it's nice and straight and the knee is facing downward. From here, we're going to stay upright in our Swan Pose. Check in with the hips. Check to see if you're tilting or leaning on one side more than the other. And feel free to use your props. Maybe it feels better to have a block underneath this hip. When you do so, you may find that you can open up the shin to be more parallel with the top edge of the mat. And you can stay in this pose or this variation on this side. It's always good to experiment with your props and your blocks. And just know that you may be different on one side versus the other. Maybe you felt very open on the right, whereas on the left, maybe not quite as open. So you think maybe a block or a blanket underneath this hip would feel really good. I think for me, I'm feeling it using both methods, so I'll just stick with the block and hang out here for the next minute until we come into our sleeping swan. Also, I should have mentioned this on the first go around. If the back knee is bothering you, having it extended in your Swan Pose, a little cushion with the blanket is always nice, or else folding up the edge of your mat. If you can get that tucked underneath the knee, that will help as well. From your Swan Pose, we're going to come into our sleeping swan. So again, just your props. Maybe remove the block if that's more comfortable. Change the bend of the knee. I'm going to use my bolster on this side and then drape the torso down until you come into sleeping swan. When you're ready, I know it can be very tempting to stay in that pose for a really long time. Go ahead, remove your bolster. Keep your props nearby in case you need them for the next pose. And we're going to shift onto that left hip and draw the right leg around for our shoelace pose on this side. Again, you can come into that seated figure 4 or a reclined butterfly pose if those feel good today. Otherwise, if you are joining me in shoelace, let's stack the right knee as much as we can on top of the left. If there is some gapping in between the knees, that's totally fine. You can have a blanket or a cushion there if you feel like you need the support. From here, we'll sit up tall, checking in with the sit bones so that we are nice and balanced on either side, and then start to walk forward, bending from the hips, and then just allowing the torso to drape down and over the legs. Now going from our pigeon into a shoelace pose, and for holding as long as we are, we're creating a lot of what's called creep into the muscle. So we're creating an elongation of the muscle. You can think of it as if you would take some silly putty and just set it on the table, and if you left it alone, over time you'll notice that the silly putty starts to spread. And so you can think of our muscles kind of like that silly putty. We're using time and also stressing the joints and the muscles, and over time that causes an elongation. That elongation and that stress is healthy for the joints when we do it in an appropriate amount of time and also an appropriate edge. But you will notice that when you come out of these poses, you feel sometimes a weakening, and that is because of that lengthening that we're creating in this space of time that we're holding the pose. The creep comes back, and we allow the muscles to shorten by using these counter poses, and also by taking a lot of care when we move after our yin practice. Because if we start to move too quickly, you might feel like things are a little too loose right away. So just use that care, and over time you'll find that the joints do become more healthy and more mobile. And your recovery from that creep may be a little easier over time as well with a nice healthy yin practice. We'll start to come out of our shoelace or our figure 4 or reclined butterfly, whatever your option was for today. And from here, again, we'll just take the hands behind the hips, bring the legs out in front of us. We'll take a nice little windshield wiper of the legs, again, using care, accounting for that creep, that extra lengthening into the hips and into the inner groin and thighs. And we'll follow this pose with saddle, also known as hero pose. And now this posture can be very difficult for those who have knee issues. So you can just come into a seated hero pose. Feel free to pad the knees, to pad the tops of the feet as well, because holding this for more than 1 minute can get a little intense onto the ankles. If you would like to increase your hero pose and you are confident that your knees are nice and healthy and can tolerate it, you can open up the knees just a little bit wider. We're going to open up the feet so that they're outside of the hips, and then resting outside of our, just outside of our thighs. And we're seated down in between the feet. So you can come all the way down into the mat, or if you want that external rotation, to get somewhat of a feel of hero pose, you can open up the feet just slightly outside of the hips, but still stay seated on a block, and that will help with the knees a lot. Take your version, whether seated up on a block or a bolster, come into your saddle pose, and then if you also would like, you can start to recline and maybe just take it easy here in your saddle pose, coming onto your forearms, or maybe come all the way down onto your mat. I'm running out of a little bit of mat space, so I'm going to stay up here on my forearms. And wherever you're at, find that stillness. Use your intention. Come back to the breath. This is probably one of the most intense poses that we will have for today. Allow the legs to stay heavy. Feel that connection along the front of the shin into the mat, into the earth, getting a wonderful stretch onto the tops of the feet. I promise I won't make you hold this one for much longer. We'll just take 3 more nice inhales and exhales. And to come out, again, we move with care. This is perhaps not the most graceful pose to get out of. First, make your way to upright. From there, start to walk your hands forward, coming into a tabletop. From tabletop, just take a moment to pause. When you're ready, maybe give the feet, the tops of the feet, a little tap. Getting some movement into those knees. And then maybe if you want to take a little cat and cow to feel that into the hips. We can also use that as a short counter pose for a very strong saddle. Wonderful. From saddle, we're going to come onto our backs. So go ahead and roll down onto your backs, almost like you're coming into Shavasana. So align yourself into the center of the mat. Extend the legs out long, right in front of you. we're going to come into our banana pose. So banana pose, it's a little easier to actually start with adjusting the upper body first than it is the legs. So for our banana pose, we're going to start, let's lift the hips up just a little bit and then drop them over to the left about 2 inches or so. And from here, we're going to work that upper body so that we're aiming towards the back right corner of the mat. And then from here, you can take the hands above the head, take a hold of that left wrist into the right hand. Keep the hips and the glutes glued to the mat, and then we'll angle the feet towards the top right corner of the mat. And you can keep the feet right next to each other. If you would like an extra lateral stretch on the outside of that left leg, you can cross the left ankle on top of the right. And from here, we'll just hold. Enjoy the stretch on the outside of that left side body. Feel those left side ribs start to crack open and expand with every inhale. Relax the upper body. Relax the shoulders into the mat. Feel that left hip stay heavy. If you do have a sandbag or maybe a heavier blanket, it can also be very nice to keep that left hip weighted down. When you're ready, I suggest unclasping the hands, starting to straighten out the upper body. From there, if you had the left ankle clasped over the right, you can just bring the soles of the feet to the mat, and then lift the hips up and just allow yourself to find that alignment again in the torso so that we're now just centered back up into the mat. And we have taken that lateral twist out of the body. Taking a moment here, just a nice inhale. You can have the hands resting on the belly. And then exhale it out. This time we'll pick the hips up, shift them over to the right about 2 inches. And now adjusting the upper body so that we're leaning, drawing ourselves to that back left corner of the mat, the arms up overhead, and then taking the right wrist into the left hand. Now the feet extend, and then draw them towards the top left corner of the mat. Right ankle can cross over the left if you would like that little extra lateral side body stretch into the outside of the right leg. Keeping the glutes connected firmly to the mat. The right hip is pressing down into the mat. Maybe using that left foot to give the right foot a little extra pull, increasing the sensation to the outside of the right body. When you're ready, we'll start to come back to center and realign the spine. You can start by unclasping the arms, straightening out the torso, and then unwinding the legs. Maybe shifting the hips back into center line. Again, taking a nice inhale and exhale. The hands can come to heart center and also to the belly. We're going to prepare for our very last pose of this sequence, and we're going to take a recline twist. So this time we're going to shift the hips off towards the left, just an inch or two, and then keeping the knees together, we'll allow the knees to shift over towards the right. I'm going to just adjust a little bit so I have some more room here. Knees come over towards the right. You can take the right hand to the outside of the left thigh. Maybe extend that left arm long. Gaze can stay neutral, or else you can take the gaze to the left hand. And we're just going to stay here for 3 breaths. On the next inhale, let's bring the knees back to center. Take the spine to a neutral position. And then we'll lift the hips, take them over towards the right. Keep the shoulders glued to the mat as you allow the knees to drop over to the left. Maybe the left hand to the outside of the right thigh, and the right arm can extend out long. Gaze is your preference depending on how your neck feels today. Either keep it neutral, looking up towards the ceiling, or gaze over towards your right hand. Three gentle breaths here. Maybe reaffirming that intention that you set at the beginning of class. And on the next inhale, let's bring the legs up back to center. Realign the spine and extend the legs long for our Shavasana. Again, let's just check our alignment. Even though we are in our resting pose and finishing out our class, let's end this in a wonderful, beautiful alignment so that we feel that we are extended from the crown all the way to the tailbone into a nice straight line. Allow the feet to just open up and the arms to come out alongside the body so that you're creating space and you're in a nice, comfortable Shavasana. You can also take your nice eye mask if you would like to end very comfortably, and maybe a blanket if you would like to stay nice and warm during your Shavasana. For the sake of this video, we're just going to spend about a minute here, but if you're at home, just allow the video to play out and hang out in your Shavasana as long as you want. Just using this last minute to ground into the mat, to reaffirm our connection with the earth, and to connect with that stillness that we created today. We can carry that stillness with us as we move off our mat today and embrace it. Maybe hold on to it for a little bit longer as we move into the next item of the day. Again, stay here as long as you feel that you need in your Shavasana. When you feel that you are ready, gently roll onto your side. Push yourself up into a seated position. If you would like to take a nice cross-legged pose, you can join me here. We'll inhale the arms up to the sky. Draw the hands down through heart center. Sitting tall through the crown of the head and taking just a gentle tuck of the chin as we close our eyes. And close our practice with a thank you. Thank you for joining me on the mat today. Thank you for joining me in this practice and keeping this space for yourself. As always, have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. I hope you enjoyed this practice. If you did so, please hit that like button, hit subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Make it a good one. Bye.